Have you ever been punished for doing your job too well? I have. And this is the story of how an arrogant, clueless boss tried to erase years of my hard work and ended up ruining his own career. My name is Letitia. I'm 36 years old, a logistics specialist, and I had worked for 8 years at a mid-sized transportation company in Houston. When I started, the department was pure chaos. With patience, strategy, and leadership, I turned it into the engine of the company. I became a reference point among my coworkers and was respected by the former director, Mrs. Miriam, who always acknowledged my dedication. But everything began to fall apart the day she announced her retirement. At her farewell meeting, she introduced the new director, Marcelo, the son of one of the partners. Young, full of theories, and completely unprepared. Despite his impressive academic background, he had never led anyone before. Still, the position was handed to him like a family gift. On his first day, he arrived late. He wore a light suit, expensive shoes, and that classic smile of someone who thinks they know everything. When he walked past our department, he casually referred to it as the warehouse, as if it were just some random storage space. Right then, I knew the worst was yet to come. In Marcelo's first week, the tension was already in the air. He walked through the halls like he was on a runway, always glued to his phone with a bored expression. But it only took one real challenge to reveal who he truly was. We received an urgent request to reorganize the delivery routes at the last minute, something complex, but nothing I hadn't handled before. As soon as the request came in, I gathered the team, analyzed the data, and within 2 hours we had a working solution that would save both time and fuel. Marcelo showed up only afterward, just as the plan was sitting on my desk. Without even asking what we had done, he grabbed the paper, skimmed through it, and said, "This looks messy. Who did this?" "I did," I replied calmly. "We've already run a simulation, and it worked. Even headquarters gave the green light." He raised an eyebrow and let out a sarcastic laugh. "Headquarters approved it? What headquarters? The ant colony?" The room fell silent. My colleagues exchanged quiet glances. I took a deep breath. "Marcelo, I understand if you want to review our processes, but this solution was tested. Of course we can discuss improvements, but it works." He completely ignored me and walked out, mumbling something like, "This place is about to change." And it did. The next day, he returned with a new plan. That was basically a sloppy version of what we'd already proposed, but with obvious flaws. His plan delayed deliveries by almost 4 hours, triggering a wave of complaints. I didn't celebrate the mistake, I'm not that kind of person. But I did expect him to acknowledge it. Instead, he gathered the entire department and claimed that some employees were sabotaging the transition. It was clear, he saw me as a threat. That night, I came home with a knot in my stomach. I knew what was coming. He didn't want to learn, he wanted control. And someone like me, who knew every detail of how that department ran, was an obstacle in his way. What he didn't know was that I was already thinking 2 steps ahead. If he thought he could erase me, he'd soon learn that putting out the wrong fire only makes the flames spread. After that meeting where Marcelo hinted at sabotage, something shifted inside me. I had always been discreet, focused on my work, avoiding conflict. But in that moment, I realized that to deal with someone like him, I needed to be strategic. Discretion would now become my greatest weapon. In the days that followed, Marcelo began treating me with calculated coldness. He ignored my suggestions in meetings, questioned past decisions just because they had my name on them, and started favoring employees who clearly weren't qualified, as long as they knew how to flatter him. The atmosphere among the team grew tense. Some began avoiding me, afraid of getting involved. Others came to me in private, asking what was going on. I smiled and said everything was fine. But inside, I was already setting up my chessboard. I started documenting everything: emails, messages, poor decisions, operational failures caused by his rushed changes. I knew that sooner or later, someone higher up would start asking questions, and I wanted to be ready. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. An old, important client called me directly, furious about a ridiculous delay and a rude response she'd received. When I looked into it, I discovered that Marcelo had redirected the team's efforts, completely neglecting her delivery. Worse, he was the one who had responded to her in a dry tone, without even identifying himself. I did what I always do: fixed the problem. I called her, apologized, reorganized the delivery, and gave her a personal follow-up. At the end of the call, she said something that stuck in my mind. "You're the only reason I'm still doing business with you." Those words echoed in my head. If she felt that way, how many others did too? That night, at home, I opened my laptop and began writing a report. I described the facts, attached evidence, and organized everything with dates and the real Consequences for the department's performance. It wasn't a personal attack. It was a professional X-ray. Marcelo was digging his own grave. I was just preparing to hand him the shovel when the time was right. The following week, the atmosphere at the office had become unbearable. Marcelo strutted around like a peacock, giving orders without really knowing what he was asking for. He craved admiration, wanted to feel in control. But his incompetence was beginning to show. That's when I received a notice about an emergency meeting with the board of directors. Something quite unusual. My name was on the list of attendees, which sent a chill down my spine, but also stirred a strange sense of anticipation. I knew the moment was coming. When the meeting started, Marcelo walked into the room puffed up, as if he were about to give a grand performance. He began presenting results and projections, but it was all shallow. Lots of promises, little substance. One of the directors interrupted him. "We've been getting complaints from longtime clients. And the numbers this quarter have clearly dropped. Can you explain that?" Marcelo began to stammer. He said he was modernizing processes, claimed some delays were normal during transitions, and tried to blame past management decisions. That's when one of the directors turned to me and asked, "Letitia, what do you have to say about this?" I took a deep breath. The room went silent. All eyes were on me. I have solid data, records, and specific cases that clearly show how Marcelo's management has negatively impacted the team's performance. I'm not speaking out of spite or resentment. I speak as someone who truly cares about results, about our clients, and about the company's reputation. I opened my report, shared my screen, and started going through each point. There was no need to exaggerate, the facts spoke for themselves. Marcelo tried to interrupt me several times, but the directors silenced him. One of them even said, "This is the first solid presentation we've seen since this mess began." In that moment, I realized my voice was being heard. I didn't need to yell or seek revenge out of anger. I was winning with intelligence. And for the first time, Marcelo seemed to realize he was losing control. After the meeting, Marcelo stormed out of the room, his face as red as a tomato. He didn't say a word, but the sound of hurried footsteps and doors slamming said it all. He was furious. And I knew that for someone like him, being publicly challenged was the worst kind of humiliation. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. The meeting had only been the beginning. What was coming next would require even more courage and strategy. In the days that followed, I was met with an odd silence. No emails from Marcelo, no direct orders. But I noticed glances exchanged, hushed conversations when I walked by. He was plotting something, of that, I was sure. But so was I. I organized every document, report, message, and record that proved mismanagement, misconduct, and serious errors. I wasn't looking for revenge just for the sake of it. I wanted justice. And I wanted to protect the colleagues who were being crushed by his arrogance, but were too afraid to speak up. Then, I received an anonymous message in my personal email. Someone from the finance department, who chose to remain unnamed, had sent me evidence that Marcelo was embezzling funds. Small amounts, disguised in inflated contracts. But over time, the numbers added up. I froze for a few seconds. There it was, something I never expected to find, a crime. I went to my drawer, took out the USB drive I always kept with me, and copied everything. I knew exactly who I needed to give it to. Marcelo thought he was silencing me with his indifference. But the storm was only beginning. And it would come in silence. The next morning, I woke up with a tight feeling in my chest. I knew the day would be a turning point. I reviewed the documents one last time, making sure everything was well organized and chronologically aligned. The report I was about to submit wasn't minor. It was serious. And if handled incorrectly, it could backfire on me. I took a deep breath before leaving the house. I arrived at work early, avoiding any chance of running into Marcelo. I went straight to the internal audit department, where I knew someone I could trust, Andre, a seasoned analyst known for his discretion and integrity. When I walked into his office, I closed the door behind me. He looked surprised, but the seriousness on my face quickly made it clear this wasn't a casual visit. "I have something important to show you," I began, pulling the flash drive from my bag. Andre didn't say a word. He just plugged it into his computer and started reviewing the files. As he read, his expression grew increasingly tense. "This is serious, Letitia. Very serious." "I know. That's why I came to you. I don't want this to disappear. I want a fair and thorough investigation." Andre nodded and promised to take the case straight to the compliance board. He assured me that my identity would be protected during the initial phase. I left his office feeling a mix of relief and fear. Relief for finally doing the right thing. Fear of the consequences. Marcelo wasn't a stable man. If he found out it was me, he might try to ruin me. But at that moment, my conscience was clear. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my own story. The game had changed. And this time, the rules would be different. The following days were quiet. Too quiet. Marcelo kept acting normally, as if nothing was happening. But I noticed subtle signs of unrest. His voice was more impatient. His phone calls became more frequent and always behind closed doors. And he started casting suspicious glances at everyone in the department. I pretended not to notice. I carried out my tasks flawlessly, maintaining my professional composure and polite smile. But inside, every hour felt like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. On Thursday that week, an email from upper management summoned Marcelo to an emergency meeting. The message was formal, with no details, but I knew exactly what it was about. He walked out of that meeting pale as a ghost. He tried to cover it up, but it was clear something had shaken him deeply. For the first time, I saw insecurity in his posture. The next day, an investigator from the compliance team began discreetly interviewing people. Questions quietly circulated through the halls. Words like audit, complaint, and misconduct were whispered alongside the clatter of keyboards and the thick tension in the air. Despite the fear, I felt stronger. I had done everything properly and ethically. There was proof. There was a process underway. Now, it was only a matter of time. That afternoon, as I left work, I saw Marcelo across the street, sitting in his car, watching me. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, everything inside me went quiet. He knew. But now, it was too late for him. Marcelo was still trying to keep up appearances. He walked around the office with his chest puffed out, pretending everything was under control. But his face said otherwise. His eyes looked sunken. His skin was pale, and the arrogant smirk he always wore had vanished. I stayed focused, but alert. I knew that when men like him feel the ground slipping beneath them, they'll try to drag down anyone they can. And I was at the center of the storm that was approaching. On Monday, he received a new request. He had to present a detailed report on all the projects from the last 6 months. I knew that would be a problem for him, since much of it had been approved without proper documentation. Documents he ignored, numbers he manipulated. That same day, the tension in the office became unbearable. Some people began quietly distancing themselves from Marcelo. He was no longer seen as the bold promise of the company's future. He was a ticking time bomb. Later, I was called in for a meeting with HR and a representative from the audit team. They asked about projects, deadlines, decisions. I answered everything calmly, as if I had rehearsed every word. I provided evidence. And at the end, I heard a phrase that sent chills down my spine. "Thank you for your courage." As I left the room, I ran into Marcelo in the hallway. He tried to give me that defiant look he always had. But this time his expression was empty. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. His pride was crumbling. And the fall was inevitable. Tuesday morning started with an eerie silence. The hallways were far too quiet. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something. And they were. At 9 a.m., a notification popped up for all employees. Emergency meeting at 10 a.m., main conference room. The news spread like wildfire. No one knew the full reason, but deep down, many had an idea. Marcelo didn't show up until a few minutes before the meeting. He looked exhausted, his suit slightly wrinkled, and the nervousness on his face was impossible to hide. When he entered the room, he avoided my gaze. I was seated in the second row, folder in hand, watching everything unfold. The board members walked in shortly after. The mood was serious. One of the senior partners took the floor. In the last few days, an internal audit has uncovered serious irregularities in the processes and decisions made by the new management. After reviewing the documents, statements, and results, the company has decided to take immediate action. The room was completely silent. Marcelo is hereby removed from his position as general manager. Effective immediately. A new leadership will be announced soon. He tried to defend himself, but was firmly cut off. The damage was already done. Around me, faces showed relief. Some even whispered words of support as Marcelo walked out of the room, utterly defeated. At that moment, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and peace. It wasn't just about seeing him removed. It was about justice. About showing that arrogance and abuse of power come with consequences. But I knew this wasn't over. I still had more to do. And he still hadn't learned his lesson. In the days that followed, Marcelo completely disappeared from the radar. No emails, no attempts to reach out. He had been removed. But there were still loose ends to tie up, and I knew he'd try one last desperate move. What he didn't know was that I was already 2 steps ahead. With his departure, the board began reorganizing teams and reviewing internal processes. I took the opportunity to present a detailed report. I had secretly been preparing for weeks: data, missed deadlines, questionable decisions, And even evidence of favoritism and contracts involving people connected to Marcelo. The board was stunned. It was the missing piece. A week later, I was called into a private meeting. I thought it was just another ordinary discussion. But it wasn't. When I entered the room, the three main partners were waiting for me, serious, but with a slight smile on their faces. Letitia, one of them began, "You've shown courage, intelligence, and patience. The way you handled everything proved to us who truly belongs in a leadership role." They offered me a new position, Chief Operations Officer. I didn't accept right away. I took a deep breath and asked for time. I wanted to make a thoughtful decision, not one driven by someone else's downfall. But deep down, I already knew my answer. That night, staring out at the city from my apartment window, I felt something different. A deep peace. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was built with intelligence, strategy, and integrity. Marcelo destroyed his own career. I simply revealed the truth. And now, the future was in my hands.